Yes, now I'm Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the 4th edition of Shadowrun. So, when we last left off, we had been talking about some information about your characters and their reputation. Let's talk ID. The fact is, anonymity is critical to a Shadowrunner's life, to remain out of the spotlight. We talked about it when we talked about your reputation. But there are so many levels and forms of ID out there that it can be insane nowadays. And so much information about you. The Matrix is all around you. There's, of course, data mining, data storage. Folks can be tracked by both their SIN, their bank transactions. Heck, your movement of the wireless network of your commlink can be used to track you. So information is out there everywhere. And your runner wants to avoid getting caught up in most of it. The more you avoid, the better you are. Let's talk about the most key component of all of this, the SIN, the System Identification Number. This was introduced in the 2030s by the UCAS as a way to register all their legal citizens. Those without a SIN are probationary citizens that have little to no rights within the system itself. Nowadays, if you're born, you get a SIN. But you usually have to be born in an area that's regulated, a legal area to be born in, effectively. If you're born in the slums, or the barrens, or some other place, there is a very good chance that you will not be born with a SIN, because you're going to be born in an area where people are just not paying attention to you. Now, the UCAS isn't the only one that uses SINs. Most countries, many countries use SINs. Now, they don't necessarily call it SIN. They may call it something else completely, but they have their own version of it. All SINs are to a degree regulated by the corporations. They have their own standards and an own regulatory body in the G-SINer. This G-SINer group basically allows for a standardized use of SINs and standardized application of them. And this particular holds true to corporations, to extraterritorial ones that will have their own workers and citizens. More nations and corporations, though, combined, do have to make sure that they have a level of registration within the G-SINer itself. Now, this doesn't mean all your information that's with your country is registered with them. There is still a level of anonymity, but it is registered in such a way that if a law enforcement group needs to get information about you, they can use the G-SINer itself to link up to any country that has a SIN system, that your SIN, if you're a criminal, they might be able to find you through it. Now, it is possible to have dual citizenship, to have two SINs. The fact is, though, most countries or most groups will have you give up your old SIN in order to get the new one once you sort of change allegiances. It's a way to ensure that you are keeping with only one citizenship rather than multiple ones. It will depend on where you're getting these two citizenships from. Now, an important thing to note, of course, is the crash of 64. Because this messed with this system. In the crash of 64, so much data that was on the Matrix was lost. Identities, complete identities, were wiped out. People that had been legal SIN citizens, gone. All the information about them. So the UCAS and many other countries had amnesty. Amnesty for those that had lost their SINs. This actually ended up helping a lot of people that were in the shadows or out of the system itself to move into the system, to become actual citizens, to become real people in a way, to either get a new life, a new identity. People took advantage of this in order to bring themselves out of the gutter, along with those that had lost their things, because it was no telling how much was really lost. So much information was gone. Now, it is possible to get a SIN even nowadays. You have to go to the UCAS and prove that you would be an outstanding citizen to them. If you can do that, then it's very possible that you, whoever you are that might not have had one, could get a SIN from them. And this does work with other bodies, and depending on each group, they have their own way of basically giving out. UCAS probably is one of the quotations easier ones. But again, you have to be an outstanding citizen. If you die, your sin basically is deactivated. So that's another thing too, is if you're dead, sin's deactivated, it doesn't work anymore. It happens as soon as you're registered within the system itself as being dead. Sins are much more than just an identification number nowadays also. The amount of information connected to a sin is staggering. Most of the time it includes your date of birth, the country you were born in, your technical citizenship, and at least your initials. That all this information is given out as part of your sin when you be using your sin to identify yourself. Runners are sinless by default. The sinless effectively have no rights. I said this before. If you're arrested as a sinless, you can be treated however they want. Now, this doesn't mean that more extreme forms of basically treatment are made on those that are arrested as criminals. It does happen, but not very often. Most of the time, as a criminal, you are still treated relatively well. Usually depends on the amount of crime, how a normal person that would have committed this crime would be treated. If you're sinless, you'll be issued a criminal sin. And a criminal sin has all the data of a normal sin plus more. Your biometrics, your DNA, all this other information which will help to identify you even more exactly. That this information is now on record about you. A criminal sin is much worse than a normal sin in a way, because it's so much more identification of you. Now, without a sin, there's a lot of things you cannot do within a country. Start a bank account, own property. There's so many more things that you need a sin in order to do. If you have a criminal sin, you have just as much of a hassle. Guess what? You're registered, but now you're a criminal. So there's still a lot of problems. Maybe less than if you were sinless, but still so much problems with going through with everything. Heck, the way the things are nowadays, even taking a bus requires you to have a sin. Think about that. I need identification as a citizen even to get a ride on the bus. Whether criminal or not, and criminal, I might have a hassle about it. Because guess what? I'm a terrible, no-good criminal in their eyes. In the old days, your sin, your identification, all that kind of ID you would have would be on some kind of cred stick that you would use to identify yourself. With the wireless and the Matrix going wireless, that kind of has gone away. Cred sticks are now actually just used for anonymous payments if you ever need them. Your commlink will have all that data on you. It'll have your medical records, it'll have your insurance, it will have your ID, your SIN, everything you need to know, your licenses, any kind of possible information to identify you. And it will be encrypted with a level 5 encryption. And it's not going to be broadcast. It doesn't go out to all your social media. This is information that's kept deep within your commlink that you will have there, so you can use your commlink as the ID that it is oftentimes used as, and it will only transmit the data that you want to. Now the thing is, there might be a requirement for data to be transferred to certain areas. You might need to show your SIN to enter into an area. You might need to show certain types of ID or licenses to enter other areas, to do certain things. You will use your commlink to do this. Now, the thing is, they do use specialized ways of transmitting this data. It isn't an open broadcast transmit, because that can always be observed. Usually it's either a kind of short-term, kind of very close range, a burst of signal, something that's not you'd have to be like right there to pick it up, or they wire it in to get that information. Another thing that someone will have to be physically wired in there to interrupt this data transfer. It's a good way of keeping that data from spreading, and yes, so you might need to use your commlink as an ID, but traditionally it's not going to be as bad as, it's not transmitting that data truly the worst way. Just making sure that you're hiding all this information and keeping yourself anonymous is one of that major goals of the Shadowrunner, of the runner itself. All this data, you don't want it getting out there. You're going to be obsessed with it. As much as you don't want an actual, identification, you're going to be obsessed with the anonymity that you want to achieve and avoid all of this. But that's it for today. So, we went over some basics of your identification. We talked about what the SIN is, all the information about it, a little bit of its history, and a little bit how it's used nowadays. Talked about your commlink as your major ID. In the next episode, we are going to talk about IDs some more and move into talking about your lifestyle. Lifestyle affects you pretty heavily too. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows support for the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon. Link in the description below. There's some great rewards there that help to grow and improve the channel and the Empire. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.